Research. It's an intimidating term to a lot of students. What does it mean, you may ask, to research? And can I do it? The answer is, first of all, what research is learning about past studies so that it benefits your own ability to investigate. That's what research is all about. Learning about past studies so that it informs your ability to research something similar. And can you do it? Absolutely. You do it every single day with other things in your life. If you go to see a movie, you probably look up reviews of what other people have said about the movie, or you look at the trailer. That's doing research. If you're going to buy a car, you probably don't just show up and start making offers. You probably research the safety of the car. You probably take a look at what the gas mileage is. You look at some of the features, like whether it has a sunroof or a decent radio system. You're doing research in your own life all the time, so this is no different. This is a research class. This is comparative media. It's a 400 level class for some of you and a 500 level class for our graduate students. And so there are going to be different requirements on this research paper. So first of all, the research paper is due the 7th of June. The 7th of June, it's our last day of class. The proposal is a different document. The research proposal is designed to get you off to a good start on your research paper. So it's a small step towards that. It's worth 5 points for both of you, whereas the research paper is the big deal in this class. It's the embodiment of the skills that you have acquired in investigating media systems. That is going to be worth 20 points for undergraduates and 40 points for graduate students in this class. So what I want to do in the remainder of this video is explain exactly what is due for both of these assignments. The research proposal is due this Friday by 1 o'clock. So you have a few days to get your act together, 2 precisely, with this 5-point assignment. Let's talk about what both of these involve. Let's start first with the research paper, and then we'll come back and talk about the proposal. All right, so page length for the research paper, it's going to be 12 to 15 pages for undergraduates, and it's going to be 15 to 20 pages for graduate students. You must follow what is known as a style guide. That is a method for documenting what you are studying when you're doing your research and documenting using appropriate grammar. There are 3 different style guides. You can use the APA style guide, American Psychological Association. You can use the MLA style guide. I forget what those letters stand for. Or you could use the Chicago Manual of Style. Most students choose APA. Look it up. You should already know how to do it from a communication research class, but you'll need to do some research on how to follow a particular style if you aren't familiar. All right, now let's get to what the heart of this paper is all about. The directions for this paper are, you're going to compare what is known as a, quote, content theme. You're going to compare a content theme in a sample of media content from the country that you have selected to follow early in the semester, also with another student's selected country media system. So I'm going to ask you today to pair up with another student. You can only pair up with one other student in the class. We will have an odd number of students in the class because we have 9 undergraduates. So one undergraduate student will be either able to pair up with a student that another student has, or to just choose a random country, not random so much, but as a country to study on your own. So the purpose of pairing up with a student is not to write your papers together. You're going to write individual papers, but it's to learn from that other student's country's media system, to learn from that other student's research into their country's media system, so that you are not starting from scratch with that country's media system. And also it's to get you talking with another classmate, to get you to compare notes and see how you're doing together. All right, so you're studying a content theme. Now, what is a content theme? You're not going to be able to go out in the research and find out what a content theme is, because it's a term that I have made up for this class. A content theme is a theme that emerges from the media content. You can tell when you have a content theme because it will be introduced in your paper with the portrayal of XXX in the media content between the 2 countries that you're studying. The portrayal of is the content theme. So one example is going to be if you select a television comedy that you want to look at from the country you've been studying, and you want to compare it to another television comedy, or sitcom as they are also known in another student's country, then one thing that you might be interested in is the portrayal of female and male equality in the content of both of those countries. Now, I'll come back later and describe how we would flesh that out in the research paper, but that is an example of one content theme. It's the portrayal of. Now, having said that, I don't want anybody in the class to do male, female content themes. I want you to think on your own. I'm reluctant to even give you examples because it may give you an idea that I want you to come up with on your own. So the content theme is something that you construct. It's a theme. You know what a theme is. There's a theme that runs throughout a show. There's a theme that runs throughout weather. There's a theme that runs throughout food at a restaurant. You can find themes. It's a regularly occurring idea. And that's what you're going to be doing. You're talking about how each media content is portraying that content theme. Now, when I say sample of media content, please do not make the mistake of analyzing an entire season of comedies or of films or of news programs or whatever you're going to analyze. It's one episode, one sample. If you're looking at films, don't look at the whole series of films. Look at one film from one country, one film from another country. If you're looking at a billboard from one country, look at one billboard from the other country. If you're looking at one radio show from one country, we look at one radio show from another country. If you're looking at one television show, one TV show, not all the episodes, not the series. Okay, so a lot of students make that mistake. I'm not quite sure why. That's why I'm going on a bit at length here. And I'm trying also to communicate that what you choose to study is totally up to you. It could be a web page, it could be a t-shirt. We've defined media very broadly as long as you can tie it to coming from another country. So as far as the general format of the paper goes, now let's go on to that now. Let's discuss the format. So it's going to have several parts to it. The page length for each part of it is up to you to determine. I can kind of give you some guidelines on it. Let's start with the very first section, going from the handout here. I hope you're reading from the handout under D2L, the handout on guidelines for the research paper assignment. The first section is your intro section. You have an intro in anything that you deliver, either written or orally in the academic world. So you have an intro. In your intro, I want you to cover why it's important to compare media in general, using your own thinking. I want you to then name the two samples of media content that you are going to cover. Then I want you to provide a brief background on both of these samples so that the reader, me, or anybody else who reads your paper, knows enough about these two sample media contents that they can get into your paper. If they don't have any knowledge, that's what you're shooting for here. Not a lot of background, just award-winning television show, or had the actors on it that also made this other TV series famous, or this newspaper article caused a lot of controversy when it came out. Whatever you think that might help the reader understand the background. Then you come up with the theme that you are studying. Your theme is going to be introduced with these words: the portrayal of XXX, and X is what you are yourself thinking of in the sample of media content. For example, studying male-female equality in a UK television show versus a Mexican TV show, or a US TV show versus a Mexican TV show. That's up to you. So that's the intro. It gets that out of the way. Oh, there's one other thing that you do in the intro. Sorry, this is all listed in your guidelines under the content tab, is you are going to say overall whether the two samples of media content are mostly similar or mostly different in terms of your expectations. You may come out with a different finding. That's what the academic research enterprise is all about, is you are researching something that you may come up with a conclusion that you didn't expect. And that, in a way, proves that you are a true academic researcher because you're detached from the findings. You're not wedded to them. The findings are not your own personal commentary. You are a detached researcher. So I want you at this point to speculate whether the two media samples you think are going to be similar or different. That's section one. That's the intro section. Next up is a section that's called the literature review. A lot of students have a tough time understanding what a literature review. It's not a literary review. A literary review is reviewing a piece of literature in terms of its artistic, creative expression. That's done in the English department. What we do, and what the English department also does for some of its investigation, is a literature review. And that means that you're going to look at other people's research and see what they have found. And then you're going to use that research to inform your own research. Specifically, you're going to use their research to inform your variables section, the next section that I'm going to talk about, and also your findings and your conclusions section. That's what you're going to be doing, look at other people's research into media in your country. This is where you're going to dig into the research phase of this course. And to help you do this, I have provided an email with librarian information at ESU. The Kemp Library has great services. If you don't know where to start in finding research articles on media in your country, this is where you want to go. You want to go to the information that I provided you in the Kemp Library email that I sent out. So graduate students will have to find a different number of research sources than undergraduates, but you will all be finding research articles, just like you're going to read a review by Consumer Reports of a vehicle that you're thinking of purchasing. That's what you're doing with a literature review. You're looking at past studies. And when you look for past studies, you may not find exactly a study of the radio song that you want to find information on. You may have to look broader. You may have to look at romantic radio songs as they are aired in Bulgaria or wherever it is that you have to go. You have to cast the net as narrow as you can, but sometimes you have to make it wide in order to capture somebody's previous research in a way that's going to be beneficial to your research. So in the literature review, you're going to provide a 1-paragraph summary of each journal article that you read. And in that 1-paragraph summary, you're going to provide how the findings of the study are going to help you with your study. You're going to say, this should help me when I want to study blah, blah, blah. And most of the blah, blah, blah is going to be your variables section, which I'll talk about in a moment. So you talk about under this section how the findings of the article will relate to your study. And you also talk about, if possible, what you expect to find in the sample of media content that you're looking at, given what an article says. If an article has studied a web page that is marketing government services, and you're looking at a web page in 2 countries that does that, you may get some information from that research that says what you would expect to find in the content of the web page and the web pages that you are studying in both countries. So that's the literature review. That's going to probably take 2 to 3 pages, I would say, in a research paper. A little bit longer for the graduate students. They have more, but minimum, I would say 2 pages, maybe 3. Now variables. That's the next section of the paper, variables section. The variables section is going to be a very short section of your paper. In the variables section, you're going to break down your theme into 3 subcomponent variables that you're going to study. Variables vary. So when you're breaking down your theme, you're trying to get to a level of precision in studying that theme that is only possible by looking at more individual subcomponents. So let's say that you did want to study equality between genders in 2 comedies. Then you break that down into variables. And the way that you could break that down, again, there's no magic roadmap here. It's your own original thinking. That's what research is about. It's a creative enterprise. But if I wanted to break down the idea of gender equality, I would look at one variable as economic equality. And economic equality would be the behaviors of the people in terms of spending money. Do the women have the same kind of equality in the particular comedy that I'm looking at? That's economic equality. I might also look at as a second variable, domestic equality. Domestic equality in the home. Does each gender have the same say over things like finances, over decorating, over the work that needs to be done, over how children are raised? Is there equality in the home? That would be domestic equality. And third and finally, I would say would be socializing equality. To what extent do both genders have the equality in their ability to make friends and to go out away from the home, especially if there are kids involved? That's just one way that I could break down a content theme of gender equality. You're going to be doing the same thing, except you're not going to be doing gender equality. You're going to be looking at things that you have to think of. It's going to be hard. You're going to have to summon some deep thought to come up with what kind of content theme is that you want to study, what you're interested in. Is it going to be more politically oriented? It's going to be more comedy oriented? What's it going to be? But in this section, the variables section, you're going to construct your variables, and you're doing that in part from your literature review. If somebody else studied gender equality in a research article and they looked at domestic equality, that gives you the idea that this could be a sub-variable that you're studying. So in this section, even though it's short, it has important components to it. You have to name the variable, you You have to say the variable is economic equality or domestic equality. And then you have to define what constitutes the variable so that I know when you see or what you think you see happening in your media content is really happening. And that's only by virtue of how you define your variable. So you have to define your variable. Economic equality, for example, defined as behaviors by either gender having to do with spending money or making decisions about spending money. That's my definition. Now, every time I see dialogue in the TV comedy that is doing this, I can say, here we have an example of economic equality. All right, now it's important that in that variable section, you don't start to get into your comparisons between media content. No, you're just setting up the frame of your methodology. Remember that term, methodology? We talked about that in studying media as a system. You're going to have a methodology in this study that's based on 3 variables. So don't start your comparisons there. That's for the next section. The next section now is comparisons. This is going to be the bulk of your paper. This should not be a 2-page exercise. This is going to be upwards of 8 pages. This is going to be where you compare each variable with a heading. This is variable 1, economic equality. Here's what happened in my first TV show. Here's some dialogue from the TV show. Here's some actions on the part of characters. This is illustrating whether there is equality in gender between these two shows. You're going to take 7 or 8 pages to do these comparisons. That's the most important part of your paper, is the comparisons between the two content. This is where the similarities and the differences are going to come out. And you're going to have sections in here by each variable, right? So I can see you were just analyzing variable 1. Now you're just analyzing variable 2. You were just analyzing variable 3. Then you're going to come to the next section of the paper, the discussion section of the paper, maybe 1 to 2 pages. Again, to graduate students, a little bit longer. This is where you're going to discuss the elements of each country's media system based on what we've been learning about in the class, the financing, the regulation, the cultural characteristics, etc. Those are the variables that you're going to now bring in, not variables, elements, sorry, wrong word there. That's those, we called them variables when we studied them in the class, but in terms of this paper, they are elements. And they're going to be used to say, which do you think is having the biggest impact on the media content that you're studying? Is it financing? Is it regulation? Is it cultural characteristics? Is it accessibility? And why? That's where you do that in discussion. In discussion, you've got comparisons. That's one level of knowledge that you created, right? Here's the comparison section between my variables in the paper. Now the next level is discussion. What does it mean? What can we say about the media system based on what we've learned in this class in terms of the elements influencing the content? And now that takes you to your final section, the conclusion section of your paper, other than appendices and a bibliography, which you're going to have on the back end of the paper. But the final sort of text part of the paper, the conclusion, is going to be 1 to 2 pages long, and it's going to be what your overall findings say about your country's media system. What are the really big implications about the media system? What specifically are the benefits and the deficits for the people who grew up in a country and are exposed to that media system? And in the conclusions also, it's traditional to identify a surprise from your study, a surprise that you found, as well as identifying a weakness in your study. And that weakness usually leads you to your ending to the paper, which is to say what future research can take a look at because the current research that's out there is weak. All right, so that's the full-bodied paper. Now let's move on and talk about the research proposal to help get you jump-started on what may seem like an intimidating assignment, but hopefully won't be because you are quite capable of producing your own research. You just may not realize it. So let's talk about the research proposal assignment now. Research proposal due this Friday by 1 o'clock. And the purpose of the research proposal is to orient the researcher. Think of yourself as that, a researcher, towards a research area that can be investigated by comparing 2 samples of media content. So a research proposal sets the parameters of the study so that you can proceed to go to your study with a very tight focus. You're not all over the place. You're not bringing in all things that don't really keep you focused on your central task. There are 3 components to this research proposal that you'll be turning into the Dropbox. The first one is the introduction, and you will hear some similar elements here, and that's similar ideas here, components, similar components part of the introduction, and that's by design. It's so that you can plug in some of the work that you've already done from your proposal into your final paper. So in your introduction, you have an opening statement about why media is important to compare, and then you identify the 2 publications or the 2 programs that you're going to study or the 2 websites, whatever it is. And then you're going to identify why the two programs or publications are appropriate to compare. What makes them similar enough to compare? They don't have to be exactly similar, but what makes them close enough that they're comparable? And then you're going to identify the content theme that you want to study. So that's it for the intro. Then in the second part of your research proposal, you're going to identify the literature that you are going to review. You don't have to have read your literature yet, but you had to have found your sources. So all of the sources that you're going to use in your research paper must be found by this Friday through work with the librarian, etc. So you're going to identify that, you're going to name them out in proper bibliographic citation form. You're going to give them to me in APA form. I can take a look at those. I can make sure that they're academic. I can see what your range of resources is going to include. That's what you're doing. You're just finding the journal article titles. And then thirdly is going to be the speculation part of your paper. This is where you're setting up whether you're going to find what you think you're going to find. So you're going to speculate what you expect to find in terms of the major similarities and the major differences between the two samples of media content. And you're going to explain why you expect to reach these findings based on the reasoning that you know about the two countries already, and from the course readings, and also from your own personal experience. So you're speculating here, and then you're going to find out whether that's all true. This is the research proposal. It's going to be 1 to 2 pages, depending how efficient you are with the wording. It's due by this Friday at 1 o'clock, and then I'm going to give you feedback on it. And that's the whole purpose, is so that you develop an idea, and now you need to refine it a little bit more, probably. I'll have to see when I read your stuff. Refine it before you can go full-fledged with the research paper. Both of these together will enable you to investigate the country's media system that you have elected to study, as well as another ones in a deep and academic way with academic integrity. If you have any questions, please just let me know. Good day.